This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, Season 10, Episode 10. Welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network of podcasts, brought to you by HK, that'd be Heckler & Koch. Today is Thursday, July 24th, 2024. I'm your host, Jacob Paulson. I'm also joined today by Brian McLaughlin. Doc. Don't forget to follow us today on all the social medias here, update with the latest news in the industry. I think just real quick, it's worth addressing because we've had some emails and things. People are like, "Where's the Riley Bowman?" Riley will be back. It's okay. He's not dead. We didn't fire him. Like, he's around. It's all good. Yeah, just taking a little bit of a break from some things. So anyway, for those who are worried, he's fine. He'll be back. So today we got a great topic for you. We're going to talk about the attempted presidential assassination of former president, future president hopeful Donald Trump. Talk about what went down, maybe some lessons to be learned, all the nitty-gritty juiciness. That's the plan, right, Brian?
That is the plan. Nitty-gritty juiciness. Sounds delicious and horrible all at the same time.
We're going to try and spread out the sponsor messages a little bit today, so we'll hit a couple of these a little bit later in the recording. But certainly want to thank HK for sponsoring the Concealed Carry Podcast. They are our current title sponsor, and we're just really grateful for their support and all the things that we're doing and all the elements of our business. So get yourself an awesome HK, and you don't ever have to worry about it jamming or malfunction or doing horrible, dumb, stupid things. It's just like it's pure awesomeness in your hand all the time. So get on that. Thank you, HK. All right. So, Brian, like, what went down, dude? Like, what's the story here?
Okay, well, so as far as I know, somebody tried to off Mr. President Hopeful Trump. He doesn't have a whole lot of friends, I've heard, and a lot of people don't think that he's the best person ever. And I've heard him called the most dangerous thing to our democracy ever. So I know that that's the opinion of some people out there. I know you are kind of similar in that same category of person where, I don't know, we just kind of stay out of it for the most part, as things happen and as they do. But this one in particular kind of caught my eye because, this is kind of like a Game of Thrones kind of plot, watching everything develop as everything's kind of going on and listen to all the sayings and going ons as everything's happening. And I think that's kind of we're living in a very interesting time right now where we have such an access to information like this, where pretty much immediately most of the population understands what's going on and, how bad the situation is. Looks like we might have lost Jacob there. He's been having some trouble with his internet. Is he back? Oh, he's muted. I don't know if he's.
Oh, I was just trying to focus on you, man. I was just giving you the full screen for a second.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So yeah,
because you're awesome. I wanted people to see your face.
Oh, well, excellent. So I was just thinking that the whole point of everything was just watching everything kind of develop and unfold, and we have such a massive connection for this information so quickly, and you start to hear like subject matter experts weighing in. At least I did, like, rapidly, what they thought and how things unfolded, and it's just very interesting to see how this political stuff is kind of going on. I'd be very curious to peer behind the curtain and listen into how much they're struggling right now. Politics is getting really weird because of how information flows. What do you think your first reaction was to hearing about the attempted assassination?
I think my first reaction is, like, my mind went to, how will this get leveraged by the two parties, right? How does this fit the narrative, right? And we're seeing a little bit of that. Like, you see Donald Trump out there talking about he took a bullet for America. I think he tweeted something like that. I think you see the other side to the Democrats talking about it. They're certainly using it as an opportunity to talk about violence. How violence is not the answer and things like that, which is fine by me. It sounds like a great message. Violence is definitely not the answer. So. That was my initial reaction. I mean, listen, like, we're not intelligence analysts, Brian and I. Like this is not a podcast for conspiracy theories. Like, I mean, I can make crap up all day long. Like, hey, Trump staged that himself so that he could be a martyr. Okay. So and so conspired with the shooter and Kennedy and Grassy Knoll. Like, we could keep going, but that's like what's clear is that we do have some pretty substantial, clear evidence at this point. Like, there's some facts we definitely do know, and so those are some things we can address. Like, are there some hidden agenda or some backroom, whatever motive? Like, I don't know. No idea. Doesn't matter to me at this point, frankly. I mean, if people are doing illegal things, I guess that matters to me. I want to stop criminals from doing naughty things. But I just don't suspect we're ever going to get to the bottom of it if there's something deeper going on than random dude took a shot at Trump. Guy's got enemies. Guy's got raving fans, and this guy seems to be on the enemy side. So I guess that's my kind of initial reaction to the whole thing.
Yeah, I would say I was actually going to a UFC fight here in Denver with some of my buddies who are military, and as I was walking up to meet them, they were like, "Dude, Trump got shot," and we all just started talking about it immediately. And I was like, immediately, my very first reaction was like, "How does that happen? There's no way they screw up that badly and miss something like that." Like, that to me immediately is like, one, that is an incredibly bad stain on the reputation of the Secret Service. Like, I've been following pretty closely the congressional hearings. Is that what they're called?
Yeah. With what's her face, the
yeah,
former director
Cheater.
now.
Yeah, former director who just resigned. At first, she was saying, "I'm not going to resign," and then listening to them grill her during those congressional hearings, it was pretty brutal. Pretty much every single person that talked to her was like, "What are you still doing here?" This was a massive failure. But I think ultimately she's just a patsy. Like, she's just going to be the fall guy for this, whole thing. So.
Yeah, I think a couple of thoughts here. Like, no one's perfect. The Secret Service does not have a perfect track record. We have presidents who have been shot, on their watch. Like, there was no Secret Service when Lincoln was shot. I'm not trying to go back that far, but we do have they are not perfect. Like, they've had failures before, and I think we could go back. Like, imagine right after 9/11 when someone's like, "How does this happen? How does someone hijack a plane and fly it into a building?" Right? Like, how does that happen? Well, security is not perfect. And if someone's really willing to study it, they tend to find the flaws. Now, I'm not saying that this 20-something-year-old kid was some, terrorist who studied, like, maybe he did. I don't know. But my point is, like, it's not a perfect system. And generally, failures are the greatest teachers. Like, you think at the rally this week that Trump's speaking at, that someone's going to get away with that? No, right? Like some people have been stepping up to get. I'm just pointing out that, like, we have this presumption or paradigm where we presume certain things are infallible. We presume that Secret Service protection is infallible, that they cannot mess up. Now, I think that this is just one of those moments where, like, oh, no, they can screw up. I think the other challenging thing is that, like, we have to bear in mind, like, there's like 7,000 Secret Service agents in the field, and they have something like 30 protectees, like, right now. I think I read that somewhere. I'm making this, I'm not making this stuff up. I did, like, read something somewhere. I just don't know how much we can trust what I read. So that would seem like it's a lot per person, but when someone's traveling all the time, like the Trump family, if Trump is the protectee, like, his wife needs protection, his family needs protection, all of his properties need protection. Like, there's a lot going on, and you start to spread resources pretty thin. And so what's really clear, if you didn't already know, you'll learn after this incident, is that Secret Service does not do it all themselves. When they're on the road, when they're on site somewhere, they're heavily reliant on local law enforcement. And if there's going to be a failure, it's probably going to be somewhere between where those two things meet. That little gray area between who's in charge of this, the Secret Service or local law enforcement. And I think that's certainly probably what we saw here. At least that's one of the major failure points, is it's sort of like, okay, well, We're locking down this little spot. We're locking down the stage. We're locking down backstage. We're locking down transportation. We're locking down this this little basically bubble around the protectee, and we're counting on law enforcement to lock down these other things, right? And so I'm not blaming law enforcement. I'm not saying it's not Secret Service's fault, not even a little bit. To be clear, I would happily throw some black on their face on this one, but I'm just saying like there's this like there's some acknowledgement maybe of some things that perhaps felt like they were behind a curtain that America is learning, that maybe the average American didn't know before about how these things operate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think you also have to apply, you have two kind of philosophies that you can apply to this. You have Occam's razor and Hanlon's razor, right? Occam's razor is the concept that, if I'm remembering right, it's the simplest solution is probably the answer, right? Like looking too deep into it is probably not the right path. And then you also have Hanlon's razor that says never attribute to malice that which can adequately be explained by incompetence. So maybe, this was just a hole in the system, and this kid just happened to find it. But that's a pretty lucky thing, I think. Like for this 20-year-old untrained kid to find this one little space in the security where he just happened to exploit it just kind of perfectly seems very suspicious, and I'm glad, or I would want it to be investigated thoroughly.
Yes.
And I'm very
Yeah.
that's why I've been watching the investigation as it's been going on, because that is, to me, very curious.
And Biden has ordered an independent investigation. The Secret Service, something like some third party agency that that has some responsibility. They've ordered an independent investigation. So we'll learn more as we go. I agree that it is suspicious, but I also think that we forget about probability and like statistics, like in this kind of thing. What I mean by that is like, when's the last time we saw a failure like this by the Secret Service? Been over a decade.
81, I thought, was
so
the last.
several decades. And how many potential incidents could there have been? In other words, how many rallies have there been? How many events have there been? How many dinners? How many fundraisers? How many press conferences? How many people have walked up to the gate at the White House? How many people have walked up to the gate at the residence of one of these protected? You start to think about it like, well, what's the actual failure rate? Well, the failure rate is like 1 in 10 billion or something from our perspective. So that seems like, if that seems like, wow, how could this happen? There's part of me that's like, well, those things are inevitable. Like these things are like, it's inevitable to have things like this. And by the way, probably more probable to have some random dumb 20-year-old kid sneak through the line than some like domestic terrorist cell, because those guys are being monitored. They're being watched. The security is set up to probably more so to stop those guys. I'm just saying, like, could there be more to the story? Absolutely. But like everything about the numbers here to me says it could be no more to the story than what you already know. I'm absolutely ready and happy to embrace the possibility that there's no bigger conspiracy here, that it just is some random dude who walked around at the rally, said, hey, it looks like I could get up on that roof. And then he did. And then some people's like, who's that? And he's like, not me. And then he, got in position, and some Secret Service snipers like, what's that dude over on that roof? And then he's like, bang, 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 bang. And they're like, oh, bang back. And that might be the end of the story. I don't know.
As far as I know, the current stats are saying 8 rounds were fired. I was watching part of what we have in our outline there is the illustration. They break down the sounds of the shots so that they can kind of count the rounds. So I thought that was interesting. There was like 7 initial shots from that guy, and then you hear one final shot from the sniper that took him out.
Yeah, either 8 or 9 total, but presumably all but one from the shooter, and then the one from the Secret Service sniper. I saw some different reports about 8 shell casings being recovered, but I wasn't sure. Does that include the Secret Service guy or whatever? So let's. I feel like we've been spending a little bit here about some perspectives, but let's just quickly hash out what happened. In the outline, we're including a video from, I don't know, some network news. It might be ABC or something, but it seems to be pretty good investigative work in terms of trying to line up a timeline, to the minute, to the second of what's going on. Different camera video that's been made public that everyone has their hands on, and trying to sync those things up and saying, okay, at this point this is happening. So anyway, I think it's Brian did a good job of hunting that down. I think it's probably one of the cleanest kind of narratives of factual what happened on that day. But so I think I would kick it off by saying it seems like our shooter dude, and I'm not going to give his name out because that's kind of what my policy is, not to give these guys any fame. But this dude, he was clearly casing the site. Clearly, he's walking around. There's kind of a security bubble, kind of a, these things come in layers, right? So you kind of have this bubble that's like, hey, this is the stage. This is where Trump is. That's the tightest bubble. Then you kind of have one out where you have these like bleachers right behind the stage. Then you kind of have a roped off area in front of the stage where people can stand. So that's, kind of that second layer bubble. And then you kind of have the greater grounds, people who, are not in that bubble, but they're on site. They're walking around. They can see from a distance. They can see Trump over there, kind of thing. So that's kind of that third layer. And it seems very clear. There are plenty of pictures and camera, video evidence that the shooter was walking around outside of the, kind of the tightest bubble. Like he was on the grounds, cruising around, looking at the building, looking at the roof where he would end up shooting from. He clearly was on site and clearly had been identified as a potential threat.
Yeah, I think he even had like some drone. He set a drone up in a couple of different areas, I think I heard too.
Yeah. That seems to be one of those kind of like semi-verified things at this point. At some point, and it's not clear when or who took the picture, but a picture of the suspect, right, of the shooter did get circulated. Someone on the law enforcement side sent the picture out, and it was circulated to all Secret Service. They all had it, in hand on the phone or whatever device it is they carry around or whatever. And they knew this was a suspect. That's pretty well documented, and they had probably at least about a 9 to 10 minute, kind of before first shots were fired, they had a picture of a suspect. It doesn't look like the best picture, by the way, the one that was circulated, but it was enough that a person could get a probable kind of identification. So that's really clear. There seems to be no doubt of that. It seems really clear, based, if we're to believe the testimony given in Congress, that at some point after the suspect had been identified, that some members of law enforcement, some certain people, were assigned to go looking for the suspect. Oh, go find this person, kind of thing. He's out here. We've heard he's here. Go look for him. So they're leaving whatever posts they have, and they're going in search. And there's I saw some talk. I don't know how true it is that those people who were out searching, that if they'd stayed at their post, they had visibility of that rooftop where he climbed up on. So I don't know how true that is, but at least one version of the story where that's the case. And so you got these guys out looking for him. At this point, he's probably up on the roof. You got all sorts of non-civilian, non-law enforcement, just normal old boring civilians and attendees of the event who seem to see what's going on. You got people who are videoing the guy crawling up the roof. They're calling to law enforcement. Cops are walking around the building. They're like, where? We don't see it. What are you talking about? You got people up in the bleachers behind the stage who are turning and pointing like, hey, what's that guy doing over there? And a good solid, I'd say, minute or so before the first shots fire, you see the Secret Service sniper who ultimately would shoot the bad guy, BG. You see him kind of turn, pivot, and aim his gun toward the shooter, toward that rooftop. So that seems to be a semi-succinct kind of narrative of what's happening as we lead up to the first shot being fired.
Yeah, the entire sequence was pretty well. I know from that video that we were watching there with it went through the breakdown in the timeline. It showed that a couple of shots passed right over Trump after he had already dropped. So that first shot was the one that grazed him, and then he went under, piled on by everybody. A couple of more rounds went over top. And so like him standing up and giving that whole fist thing was just like that perfect opportunity for him to take that to, I mean, that was showmanship for sure. Like a lot of people are like, how did you let him do that? How did you let the president do that? As a Secret Service, you should never have allowed that. But like part of it is that the Secret Service are, bodyguards. If that principal wants to do something, you have to allow it. You can't force him to do something.
Well, and the command had been given at that point. We know the command had been given that the shooter was down. So, every one of those guys who's tied into the comms network, on their radio, they heard shooter down. That's documented. That's like you can see that in a lot of the video that people have shared publicly. So, at some point, that the threat is eliminated too. Brian, let's talk a little bit about distance. So, shot was taken from how many yards? Let me see if we can get that back up here.
It was 130 meters. It was 100.
Yeah, I think that sounds right to me too. I was trying to get that back in front of me. Yeah, so something like that. Oh, AR-15. We now know that this is pretty. We don't know what model, but we know this was an AR-15. We know. I think it was made by. I already forgot the name of the company. It's kind of a budget AR-15 company. Jeez, why am I brain farting on this? It starts with a D. It's 4 letters. Crap. Doesn't matter. Anyway, that's a significant distance for that gun in terms of being accurate. You've operated guns like that in a war zone before. Like, what are your thoughts about the shooter and the distance and the gun and accuracy and those kinds of things?
To me, it would be a very easy shot. I mean, especially if you're supported, that shot wouldn't be that difficult offhand if you knew what you were doing. But if he was supported and down in the prone, then that should have been a very easy shot, I would say, in my opinion, especially since it was 5.56. So I don't think it would have been that difficult at all.
Yeah, I've thought about this quite a bit because I think that if you grabbed the average shooter who's operated that gun a few times, it's his dad's gun, and say, hey, yeah, let's go shoot this at 130 yards cold. I think the average shooter would have a hard time. I think somebody who is a little bit more practiced, familiar with the weapon system, confident in the optic, and that it's sighted improperly, with a little bit more experience, that should not be a difficult shot. So there's plenty of people out there who are using this as kind of ammo for the conspiracy theory. Well, he could have shot him if he wanted to, but he missed him and nicked his ear. Things like comments like that. I've seen plenty of that. But I'm perfectly happy to accept that a person can miss at 130 yards with Dad's AR-15.
Yeah, well, definitely possible to miss. I think for a trained shooter who knows what they're doing, then that shot's super easy. But if you're a 20-year-old kid who just climbed up on the top of a roof and you're really nervous, and you're shaking, I can imagine that being a pretty difficult shot to take.
Yeah. So first shot rings out. Trump is kind of turned at the time. His head's kind of turned such that he's kind of looking in the direction of the shooter. And that's when the first shot comes and hits him in the right ear. And you kind of see him reach up to his head like, oh, what was that kind of thing? And I think somehow it dawns on him like, oh, I just got shot. And so he kind of drops to the ground immediately and starts getting tackled by the black suits. And other people are like, oh, and then you start to hear more shots. Bang, 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 bang. They start coming. And we know other people were injured, and at least one attendee of that event died, which was quite tragic, quite horrible. It's the tragic part of this incident, frankly, is that a random person who is a former firefighter, patriarch of his family, could be, at this event and get shot, as basically collateral damage in all this. That's quite terrible. So, and a couple other people injured as well, if I recall. I can't remember the number of injured, but certainly the one who died. So
three
additional shots were fired. 3 total injured. Yeah, not cool. But what I find most interesting, and this is, if I'm going to yell at the Secret Service, this is where I have some beef, is that without question, it seems very clear that the Secret Service sniper, before the first shot rang out, turned his gun and looked at that shooter on that rooftop, aimed his gun, and did not fire. And then after the shooter started firing, bang, 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 then the Secret Service, without having to make any adjustments to the gun or anything, just presses the trigger and ends that dude. So if I have beef, it's like, why weren't we acting? Like, what did you see through your optic that caused you to think, I don't need to shoot that dude? Look, okay, there's a kid in some shorts and a random brown T-shirt who's on that rooftop, and he's got some sort of AR gun, AR style weapon. Looks like he's pointing it at the stage. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna chill here and wait and see what happens. You know, if he fires, then I'll be ready to take him out. I got it all dialed in here. Like that's my biggest, like, what the crap, from my perspective of this event.
I've heard some people argue that maybe he was reluctant to shoot because it's a super crazy situation to have to shoot somebody at a political rally, and maybe he waited too long because of nervousness or something like that. But I mean, who knows? You can armchair quarterback this all for forever, of course, but that also does kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. It also kind of like leads us into kind of like what kind of things you might do to be more prepared. If you are the type of person that's going to these political rallies, like what kind of things can you do to be safe and secure? Huh?
Yeah, I think you're right there, and there's a lot there we can discuss. But I'm going to start with, the biggest kind of, thing that ties these two conversations together, which is, if this Secret Service agent was hesitant to shoot, maybe it's because he never thought it would happen to him, right? Like, I imagine, I'm just guessing. I don't, never been in the Secret Service. Like Jacob never had a badge, but I'm just guessing that if you work for the Secret Service, it's like practice all the time and very little game day. Like, I suppose game day is, hey, we're live, we're in public, we got to protect you, that kind of stuff. But very rarely, like, you could go your entire career in the Secret Service and never have shots fired, right? Never be present when a bullet flies, right? You could do 30 years in that agency in the field and never see a gun fired in the field, right? So it's not like being in the military where you're pushing to contact, right? Like, and you're going and picking fights and you expect to be shot at. Like, the Secret Service world, and what's, like, how does that translate to us? Like, think about for us, like, I've been carrying a gun on me almost every day for almost 20 years. December of this year, 2024, will be my 20-year anniversary of getting a concealed carry permit. Wow. So, not Corey, edit that out. Thanks. Cough, choke. So in 20 years, obviously, I've not carried a gun every day, right? I don't have some perfect track record, but I've been carrying a gun for about 20 years. And it's real easy for me to wake up and be like, it's just not going to happen today. Or get home from work and be like, you know what, the gun's a little bit uncomfortable today. I think I'm going to take it off. I'm going to shove it in the safe. And, I don't need it on me the rest of the day. I'm not leaving the house again. Right? Like, it's just really like that complacency is what we're talking about. That's a legitimate threat when you operate in a world where you're not doing what you're doing because the odds are high. You're doing it because the stakes are high.
That's operational risk management, right? So operational risk management would be what do we gain? What do we gain from this dangerous thing? And is it worth the risk? And if it is worth the risk, how do we reduce those risks to more manageable levels, right?
Yeah, I just think it's really easy to be complacent. I mean, I run into people often who I know have concealed carry permits, whether it's because they're friends or because they're former students of mine. And it's not common for me to run into people who actually got the gun on them. And I just think it's the sense of like, well, there's something generally emotional, not logical. There's generally something emotional that drives people to be part of this community. And that emotion will not last. It does not last. And so when it wears out, like, do you still have the necessary justification in your own mind to be diligent? I'll go another layer deep here. It could be that some of you listening to this are like, well, I always carry my gun. I always have it on me. Oh, Jacob, I don't know who you're not talking to me because I always got my gun. Okay, but have you become complacent in your mindset? Have you become complacent in your skills? Have you become complacent in other, like you could carry a gun every day and still really just not be adequately prepared because you're complacent in some of these other ways. So anyway, before we get into some of the crowd stuff, I just think there's a question here about complacency.
Yeah, one of the things we used to say to each other in Afghanistan is complacency kills. The more complacent you are, especially, sometimes we, in some regards, when you're exposed to danger on a regular basis, you can become very complacent. And then in the other regard is you don't get enough danger in your life at all, and then you stop remembering that it's a brutal world out there, and we got to stay on top of it, or else you get caught in this crossfire.
Yeah. I think we've had episodes even dedicated to this topic, so I don't want to drag it out. But I'll just say that when the emotion fades, you either need to enjoy this as a hobby, and I'm not trying to downplay the importance of carrying a gun. I'm simply trying to point out that people who have made this part of their lifestyle as almost for entertainment or hobby or part of their self-identity, they're much less likely to become complacent. Or you need to be able to justify it logically to yourself in a way that is you're able to overcome the inconvenience, because it's like you said, it's going to be a balance of inconvenience and necessity. And so the second it becomes more inconvenient than you deem it necessary, you pull out, right? So anyway, all right. So big crowds, Brian. So let's start about this. Let's talk about a secure area like this one. Let's start there, because it's not uncommon for some of us to be in secure areas. I'll give you some examples. Like, what about a sporting event? Like something as simple, like every day as that. Like people who go to baseball games and basketball games and football games, concerts. I was at a concert not that long ago at Red Rocks, which is a popular venue here in the Denver area. That's in some ways it's a secure area. We can debate how secure that is. It's not quite not exactly the Broncos Stadium, but some of these concert venues are pretty locked down compared to others. It could be a Trump rally, could be inside the airport, in the terminal where I've gone through a secure checkpoint. But let's talk about secure areas. Maybe Trump's going to come to Colorado and do a rally, and maybe one of you listening to this wants to go and give me a high five or something. I don't know if I'm going to any Trump rallies, but if I was to go to one, like, what are some considerations immediately that we might have if I know I'm going to go through a secure checkpoint? So probably not taking my gun.
Well, I think, of course, immediately my mind's going to go straight to medical. So if I'm not going to be taking weapons in, then I'm going to be relying on my ability to help everybody around me if I get injured. There's always a way to improvise a weapon, but I mean, if you're going up toe to toe against another gun, then, your odds are bad. But if you can run away, and hide, then that's going to be an excellent option, because you're no good to anybody dead. And if you have medical gear on you, that's going to be pretty beneficial. But the problem is going to be that you're going to run out pretty quickly. You might not be in a position where you can help. In this kind of a situation, they've got lots of medical on staff there that might be able to help out. But if it happens to be a mass casualty situation, a mass casualty means that all of your resources are overwhelmed. You have too many casualties and not enough providers and not enough resources to take care of them. So as soon as that begins to happen, then the EMS are going to start needing help. And if you have some basic training on how to apply tourniquets and how to do wound packing and things like that, then you can be a very great resource to everybody around you, including yourself. So if you can carry medical gear on you, that's always going to be better, right? If we can have as many tourniquets and wound packing material as we needed, then that'd be fantastic. But of course, we're not going to have that. We might have a little bit. There are these very small medical kits that you can get at Mountain Man Medical. I know we have the ankle IFAC kit, and that is something that you can secure and have beneath your pant leg, so you don't look so weird walking around with a big old trauma kit on you. You can be a little more incognito, and have some very important medical gear like a tourniquet and wound packing and some chest seals, because if you're going to be in a place where bullets are flying back and forth, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to have penetrating trauma to the chest, and how you're going to prevent a tension pneumothorax from developing is by slapping that chest seal onto the chest. And that's going to prevent that from occurring. It's because you might be in that location for a very long period of time while law enforcement and maybe Secret Service are clearing this area out, because their primary goal is going to be taking that shooter out, making the area safe. Their goal is not going to be working on the casualties that are there. So if you happen to be hunkered down in place and you've got somebody who's bleeding in front of you and you're relatively sure that you've got good cover here, maybe slap on a tourniquet. You can kind of help somebody in that particular way. But ultimately, we want to remember that we're going to run out of things. If this is a mass casualty situation, our resources are very limited. So that's where learning how to improvise various medical equipment, like tourniquets and wound packing and chest seals, is probably going to come into play. The Las Vegas shooting, for example, the number of people that were killed in that means that they would have needed a lot more chest seals to handle that particular situation. Understanding how to learn and take care of blast injuries. If you're the type of person that's going to be going to these political events, that's a real possibility that you might be dealing with IEDs and blasts. And so understanding how to take care of that's always, something good to have kind of in your back pocket, because these skills are perishable, right?
Yeah, yeah. I love your comments about improvisation. Like having taken some basic medical classes is going to give you some basic tools about how to improvise some of this gear. I also think it's worth mentioning that there shouldn't be anything in your trauma kit that you can't get past a secure checkpoint. There is, like for example, I know TSA, they will restrict trauma shears if only if the distance from the pivot to the end of the shears is more than 4 inches. So like a good full size set of shears potentially are too big to get past like a TSA secure checkpoint. But like traditional compact shears that go in most smaller IFACs and stuff are probably within the size limitation. You could take them on a plane. You could take them to a secure area of an airport, and nothing else in your trauma kit be a problem. So I think that's my
I think we might have lost Jacob there.
Oh, sorry. What's the last thing you heard me say? I bumped a cord and my camera came unplugged.
Uh-oh.
There we go. How about now? Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Were you able to hear me the whole time or did I disappear?
You disappeared for a little bit.
What's the last thing I said?
Oh, man. I'm drawing a blank. We were talking about medical. We were talking about trauma kits.
Trauma shears?
Trauma shears, that's right.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe I think I probably made that point before I bumped my little USB cable here and cut myself off. But you should be able to take medical gear into a secure area. I mean, I don't know how any given specific secure area might react if you show up with a trauma kit. They're like, "What's this for?" And you're like, "Safety, whatever." But it shouldn't be a big deal. And certainly know that the TSA guidelines are 4 inches from the pivot to the end of the shears. Anything smaller than that, you can take through a TSA checkpoint. So I like that. I like your comments about improvisation, and I want to make sure people know you should be able to take medical gear with you to these places. Like it should not be an issue for security to have medical gear. So that's really valid. One other thing that I think is worth mentioning along those lines is potentially improvised weapons or weapons that might work through a secure area. So depending on the secure area, you might be able to take pepper spray. I've definitely been many places where the gun was not allowed, and I went through a screening area where they checked for guns, but I walked right through with my pepper spray, no problem. I'm not saying that you can do that all the time. You're not supposed to take pepper spray on an airplane, for example. But I have found that that's an often thing that I can get away with. You might be risking your pepper spray going in the garbage can if it's not allowed. But
that's the cool thing, though, right? Is that it's only like, what are those, like,
$12.99 for Palm? Standing like this guy right here in my pocket. That's $12.99 Amazon Prime. So not a big deal for some of us. For some of you, you might be like, I don't want to jeopardize my $13 pepper spray. Cool, then leave that home. But something as simple as a pen is a potential improvised weapon at close distance, like a good, solid, like pen that's not going to bend or break on you, like a good like metal shaft pen is can be a fantastic improvised weapon. A high quality flashlight can be used in a lot of potential defensive contexts as a blinding tool, as a striking tool, depending on the size of the light. If it's bright enough, it could even do some good at distance. So, I've never ever been anywhere in my life where I wasn't allowed a flashlight. It's never happened. So I'm not saying those things are as good as a gun or like, yeah, it's cool, man. Just as long as you got a flashlight, you're all set. I'm just pointing out that there are some things that you can take into some of these restricted places.
I know for myself, I've been in a few pretty intense situations, and there have been a couple of times where I've not had simple gear like a flashlight, and just the level of suck that you feel when you're sitting in a situation that is extremely dangerous and very chaotic, and you're kicking yourself because you don't have some gear that could really kind of change the tide for you. So I think there are some considerations to kind of keep in your back pocket. One, gear is not
Ooh,
going to be,
literally.
yeah, keep in your back pocket, right? So like I think you could yeah, the literal statement. But you also have you have this ability to have gear on you in some regards, but your skills are weightless. If you have a toolbox full of cool skills that you can use for dangerous situations, I think that's kind of where you're going to come out on top. Like you can only carry so much stuff, especially into, a high security place like these political rallies. The only thing that you might be able to have on you is maybe that medical gear, as long as it's in a like nicely, easily recognizable. I'm not trying to hide this. It's not a tactical thing. It's in a very high visibility bag, clearly labeled as medical. All of the stuff in it is very low key and average, right? We're not having crikes and scalpels, right? We're not going to go in with that, but we're going to have some basic stuff on us that we can take care of a lot of different people with some very basic items, like full of multi-function, multi-use type items. So I think you
Yeah.
can do a lot of good for people that way.
Yeah. We have a comment here from a live viewer who says, I don't go anywhere. I can't take my CCW and my IFAC. I think that's a fine perspective too. Like if you're listening to this and like, why are we even talking about this? Like, why would you go somewhere you can't take? Like, if you can live your whole life and never go somewhere you can't take your gun, I say more power to you. I also think that most of us, though, that's not practical. Certainly, it would not work out well in my marriage. Like, I went to a concert a couple months ago, and like that, I took my daughter. It was my daughter wanted to go. Dad went with daughter, and that was huge for the relationship I have with my daughter. It was massive. It was a big deal. So I was going to go to that concert because it meant a lot to her. Um, you know, Amusement parks. Sometimes, I end up in an amusement park with family, and those are big deal things for our family to do. And most of the time, those are secure areas where I'm not going to be able to take a gun. I might be able to get some of these other tools, but probably not a gun. Maybe you're a sports fan. So anyway, I just want to point out, like, hey, if you listen to this and you think we're crazy for even talking about this idea, that's fine. Like, that's all good. If you are able to avoid secure areas all the time, like, awesome. More power to you. But you might find that you have to go through them. I served jury duty not that long ago. Can't get out of that one.
Yeah.
Gonna have to show up. Can't take my gun.
I just served jury duty a little while ago, and they took my trauma shears.
They took your trauma shears for the courtroom.
I was
Punks.
pretty pissed about it. I was going through. I'm like, "Come on, guys, trauma shears." And they're like, "Well, I'm sorry, sir, but we just need to take them." I'm like, "Okay, whatever."
Did you get them back?
They're like, "You can have them back after you come back out or whatever." And I'm like, "They're yours now. I don't care."
Yeah, disposable.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay. So moving off from that, let's presume though some other things beyond having the gun. Like in open areas, like environments that you're not familiar with, I think one of the most important things for me is cover. Like cover, I think that cover does not get enough attention in the tactical and concealed carry community. Cover is huge, 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 huge. Concealment is huge, by the way. Like I'm a huge fan of concealment, so I know that we like getting all kind of sensitive about the words. Like, well, that's not cover. Bullets will go right through it. Okay, yeah, totally, I get it. Like There's things we consider concealment. There's things we consider cover. But for my purposes for this conversation, when I say cover, I'm just referring to anything that hides you. And if it offers you some ballistic protection, bonus. But I would be paying very close attention to those things. If I was attending a rally, when I'm going through a secure checkpoint, when I'm at the concert, when I'm at the amusement park, definitely something I'm thinking about is, where am I running if the shots start ringing right now? Because nowhere I go am I guaranteed to be safe. That's been made abundantly clear. So if Trump can't be kept safe, then certainly there's nowhere I can go where someone couldn't be ringing off shots. So right now, if that happens, where am I going? Where am I going to go? I haven't been to a sporting event in a while, but I used to go to Rockies games on occasion. I like baseball. I like watching baseball more than other things. And you get your seats, and that's something I'm thinking about. I'm like, okay, like there's going to be a stampede. If shots start ringing out, there'll be a stampede. Like, how close am I to cover? Or am I better off ducking and hitting the ground and like kissing all the spilled popcorn and stuff? I don't know. So like those are things that are immediately on my mind, Brian. I'm thinking cover.
I think that's exactly right. I think when you are if you happen to have the presence of mind, well, first I want to talk a little bit about like what you were talking about how sometimes you just got to live your life, and if you are the type of person who's like, I don't want to go anywhere without my gun, that is totally up to you. Everybody gets to make their own decisions. No problem for me whatsoever. But I know for myself personally, I got a lot of life to live, and there's a lot of places that I want to go that they don't allow guns. And I'm pretty thankful for that. I'm like, I don't think guns are very acceptable in these types of environments. And now, is there the possibility for violence to occur? Yes. Is that a risk that I am willing to accept? I say yes. If I'm going to have my small children with me, then that's going to change things up dramatically. But if it's just me that's attending this event, and incurring all of this risk, then I'm much more willing to do that. So I think, it's important to live your life as well. But having those skills and doing what you can ahead of time, I think is something that's kind of like beneficial for that. And if we can shore that up with good skills, and that's where we ought to be, I think.
Yeah. I'm going to take a quick minute and recognize our other sponsor for today, which is CCW Safe. So we've talked about CCW Safe a lot. If you're a listener of this podcast, then we expect you to be aware of CCW Safe. There's a large marketplace out there, for companies that will offer self-defense coverage. I don't work for any of them, so I'm allowed to mention them all by name. So maybe you're a member of USCCA, US Law Shield, Firearm Legal Protection, Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, Second Call Defense, whatever, if you already remember one of these, I applaud you for taking the initiative. And I think any of those are probably pretty acceptable. But CCW Safe is, in my opinion, the big dog. Not big in terms of the biggest company. I don't think that's the case, but the big dog in terms of the service they provide. I'll tell you, just recently, last week, I was sitting at a coffee shop, got a call from a guy I know. I was not in my local area. I was traveling and I was hanging out. And this guy calls me. He's like, "Hey, are you in town?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Hey, where are you?" And I'm like, "I'm at this coffee shop, got my laptop out, getting some work done." He comes over and we're talking, and he was a member of one of these other organizations. And he's like, "Yeah," he's like, "You're always talking about CCW Safe and how it's the best, but I just don't like. I don't think it's any better. Like, I'm looking at the coverage, and it doesn't seem to be better than the company I'm a member of." And I was like, "Yeah, on paper, they all look pretty much the same. Like, there's little tiny things maybe that are different, but these companies are not stupid. They're not going to totally be outdone by a competitor. So they're always constantly trying to outdo each other, and they're tweaking their coverage to be about comparable. So the big dogs, for the similar price point, about $500 to $600 a year, you're all going to get about the same kind of thing. But what makes CCW Safe special is the things that are not on the paper, that are not on the chart. The little comparison chart on our website or whatever website you're looking at. What makes CCW Safe special is their approach and the people who are helping you. The people who work there, the critical response team, I think is what they call it, is comprised of defense attorneys, homicide investigators, district attorneys, people who have spent a lifetime dealing with these kinds of incidents. So that's the first thing to understand, is that they have the best team. Their national trial counsel, the people who are advising them on how to help the people, are the best attorneys in the game. They're the most informed. They're the best. And their approach to boots on the ground, like actually showing up and helping you. I've talked to 2 different CCW Safe members whose names I'm not at liberty to mention out loud here, who were bailed out of jail by a CCW Safe employee who got on a plane and flew there to help them out. So that's the kind of service that I think separates them from their competitors. So anyway, check them out at ccwsafe.com. You also can save by using the coupon code CC Podcast. That'll get you 10% off any annual membership. For those of you who are members of Guardian Nation, and if you're not, you should be, guardiannation.com. You can save up to 20%. You can find that information in your members area. All right, Brian. So going back to some crowd stuff, dealing with lots of humans and stuff and things. What are some other considerations? We talked about searching for and being prepared to get to cover. What are some other things that might be advisable in those environments?
Okay, so we're talking about being in a high risk environment. I know, like one of the things that you were talking about with cover, one of the important things is like having your exits planned out. I think one of the important things that's always helped me in very dangerous situations is running through scenarios in my head ahead of time. Always, kind of in that same kind of line of thinking. Every time that I'm walking into a gas station, I can't help it. I always think to myself, what if I walk in and this place is being robbed? What am I going to do? So I'm kind of in that. I don't expect it to be robbed. I haven't walked into that many gas stations that have been being robbed, one or two, but occasionally it goes through my mind, like, what do I go through if that's going to happen? And that helped me out quite a bit when I was in the military, and I think that's something that can help out quite a few people in these particular types of situations. If you're sitting there waiting for your concert to get set up, or you're at your sporting event, or something like that, and you got some downtime, taking a little bit of time to look around where your exit's at, where if something crazy pops off right now, how am I going to get out of here? And if you've got people with you that you really care about, and it's not just you, that you got to consider, like, how are you going to get out with them as well? There are, it makes things much, much riskier when you've got more people. If it's just me, I'm so good at running away from things and hiding from things. That's not that big of a deal. I'm not that concerned. But if I've got 3 little boys and my sweetheart with me, then that makes things much more sketchy, and that makes me want to plan and prepare a little bit better for that. And making sure that you're sharing the plan with people. If you're the only person with the plan, that's a bad day. Because if you go down and nobody knows where you're at or what the plan is, then makes things a lot more difficult. And if you have the option to position yourself near some cover, that might be a good, a big column or a, a concrete column or something like that. If you could kind of just hang out near something like that, where if you needed to, quick step over and you're behind a decent amount of protection, that could always be one of those beneficial things for you, I think, for extricating yourself from a bad situation.
Yeah.
Last thing is to have like maybe a good location for everybody to meet up at, a rendezvous point where, hey, if something crazy happens, we're going to meet up at the Good Times restaurant across the street.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. So a little forethought, having a rough plan, communicating that plan, positioning yourself accordingly. And, we've been talking about the assassination attempt on Trump, which is kind of in the, as far as I can tell, it's kind of this big field with some semi buildings nearby kind of thing. But this could be at the food court in the mall. You get to choose where in the food court you sit down to eat or to hang out or to send text messages or check your email or whatever. So you have some flexibility in what you want to do in some of those respects. I might be pretty limited in what seats I'm sitting in if I go buy tickets to the ball game, depending on my budget or how far in advance I buy my seats. But I can still be thinking about, okay, here's nearest access. I also like to identify security personnel and law enforcement so that I can, if there's an issue, I can report it very efficiently. I like to think about comms. Last week, I went to a campground, and then from that campground, I was at a gun range in southern Colorado. So in advance, I'm checking, hey, is there cell reception? Is there cell reception for my carrier? I'm a ham radio operator, so I'm trying to be more diligent about, do I have the proper gear to be able to call out on that radio if I need to. So comms, I think, are important, and having some of those things in mind. I mean, anybody can dial 911 if you got reception, but sometimes those circuits get pretty overloaded in dispatch. Really, you're going to have a hard time getting through in some situations like this. So, hey, I happen to know there's a security desk right over there. I've been able to identify that. So if I see something suspicious, I can walk right over to that security desk and say something. I think those are also really valid considerations, I guess.
I think that's a really important thing to always be telling people too. If you see something, say something. There's a lot of people that are kind of worried about, being rude or, saying something is suspicious. If you're in a situation like that and something makes you a little bit worried, like immediately tell somebody. It would be better if it wasn't a big deal and somebody looked into it and found out that it was not that big of a deal. And at least you're telling somebody and getting people notified.
Yeah, 100%. Um, I think that talking about this idea of big crowds is problematic because it can be anything. Like we just said, it could be a rally where there's the Secret Service present, could be a ball game or an amusement park where there's big crowds, but there's also security and everyone went through a security checkpoint. It could also just be,
Boston Marathon.
Yeah, the Boston Marathon, a complete unsecured situation is the food court at the mall, like I said. So another thing I quickly want to touch on is using the gun. So in a crowded situation, deploying the gun and trying to shoot at somebody, I think we have to consider in a very strong way if we're making a situation potentially worse than better, with a bunch of innocent bystanders running back and forth in a very chaotic situation where stampedes are has come and people getting run over, basically pushed down and then stomped on. Happens as much as people getting shot in some of these active shooter scenarios, depending on the size of the crowd. So, what are some best practices or considerations or just attitudes that we might keep in mind, Brian, when it comes to being, prodigious good, marksman, or considering, potential collateral damage if we decide we need to deploy our gun?
Yeah, I think that this is like something that doesn't get talked about often enough. I run into quite a few people who they carry a gun and they think about, like if there's an active shooter, I would respond and save the day with my weapon. And that I think is a very hard thing to consider. I don't think a lot of people understand how incredibly dangerous and difficult that particular situation is. And the level of training that most people have do not support that. Now, there are good things that you can do with your gun, and there are lots of people who have saved the day. They have ended an active shooter situation with their weapon. But if that is something that you're anticipating doing, like if you think to yourself, hey, if I ever find myself in that situation, I will go and attack that active shooter, then you need to be making sure that your level of training is up there. You got to be able to make that long distance shot with that pistol under stress, and you got to be confident enough to do that, because if you don't put that bullet where it's supposed to go and you add to the problem by hurting another civilian, or like here in Arvada, we had an active shooter that was rolling through Arvada, and the good guy came out of the Army Navy surplus, walked over with his pistol, shot the bad guy, walked over to picked up the rifle off of the bad guy, turned around, and a police officer rounded the corner and shot him. That is a totally normal thing that can occur. And that's nothing on that police officer. He heard shots fired, bad guys in the area, somebody with a rifle, turns around, there's a guy holding a rifle, he shoots that guy. That's just how this stuff goes sometimes. That's not a bad thing on that cop, but a lot of people who aren't really considering what an active shooter situation actually would look like, they don't think about how they might be a real target. It's far more dangerous for you than even the bad guy, right? Because he's got the cops hunting him, and then you're in there, you've got the cops and the bad guys, both of those people are going to be shooting at you. So you're in a really bad situation where bad guys and good guys are a threat to you. And if you're not prepared to handle that situation, you don't have the training to back that up, then that's going to be a hard day for everybody, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate those comments. I think that it's a very intangible. So it feels sometimes. Let me clarify. It feels sometimes very intangible in terms of, well, how skilled do I need to be, and what are the like what's how do I measure this supposed skill and training that I'm supposed to be obtaining in order to be competent in these environments. So I get that's a little bit arbitrary because we see thousands of Americans defend themselves with their guns with little to no skill at all every year in America. But yes, I think if on the flip side, if you're at the food court in the mall and you got to make a 60-yard shot with a handgun, and people are running everywhere, between you and the shooter or behind the shooter, that gets a little bit more dicey. So at very least, I think here's what I would say: are you practicing or training enough to just know your limitations? Like how skilled do you need to be? Well, that's going to vary depending on the situation. But can I ask this question? Do you know how skilled you are? That probably is one of the more relevant things here. Is that I'm teaching a class here in a couple of days on the range. I have a handful of students coming, and in most gun classes, if you go take a defensive shooting class, you'll find that generally the class is going to start out. Most firearm instructors will start out that class with some sort of skill assessment. Right. Well, let's establish where all of us are at right now. Right. Like, do you know your current skill level? Like, do you know how quickly you can get the gun out of the holster and put a shot on target in what distance? Because that would determine how if you can counter ambush somebody who's threatening you. Do you know if you can hit a target at 25 meters? That's a human shaped target, or do you not have that level of competence? I'm not saying, like, the point is, like, how skilled do you need to be to be a responsible concealed carrier? That's pretty freaking arbitrary, and I'd rather not establish a line in some ways, because then the government starts to regulate around this arbitrary line we've established. What's clear is that the level of skill you need is going to vary from situation to situation. So I would just emphasize that what's more important than determining how good you got to be, perhaps, is you just knowing how good you are, knowing your limitations.
Confidence, right? Like, I mean,
Yes.
that's a big part of it. Is you get a long way with some pretty heavy confidence. I think that's a good part of that. But how do you get that confidence? You got to go. You got to train. You have to
Yeah.
train under pressure. I think that's an important part of it. You get your heart rate up and see how well you perform. In something like that. I think that's all an important part of our growth as warriors.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I know I'm not Riley Bowman, right? Like, I know I don't do build drills in under 2 seconds. I know I am not dropping 32 targets on a USPSA stage, with clean reloads and doing the whole thing in like 12 and a half seconds. Like, I know I'm not doing that. I know I'm not that guy, but I think I do have a pretty good sense for what I am capable of, what shots I can make, what shots are kind of in the gray zone, and which shots I'm like, I just don't think I can make that shot reliably. So I do have a sense for how quickly I can draw my gun, how quickly I can get a shot on target. So I just would urge us in this question about skills to say, well, do I know where I'm at? And if it's like, well, I knew where I used to be at, well, that's not good enough either. Like, do you know where you're at? Are you measuring your skill level frequently enough to have a good sense for what your capabilities are? I think that's the most important thing here. And because once you establish that, by the way, improvement gets a lot easier, because you can also identify your weaknesses. Well, I really struggle getting a good grip from the draw. Okay, cool. That's the thing I get to go practice then. So anyway, establishing your current level of competence gives you clarity, gives you confidence in what you can do, and tells you what you need to go practice. So that works out real well. All right. I know that there's much more that we could discuss relative to large crowds, groups, secure areas, things like that. But we wanted to kind of report on the attempted presidential assassination and discuss some core base best practices, I guess, for being in secure areas or just being in large crowds generally. So hope you've gotten some insights from this. I really appreciate this comment we just got from a viewer, from Ken. You guys are awesome. Glad you're still doing the podcast. Longtime fan. Wow, thanks, Ken. We've been at this for a long time, and it's nice to know people are still sticking around from the beginning. We must still be saying something good. All right. Thank you all. Brian, any last thoughts before we move on?
Hey, stay safe out there. Things are getting crazy. I would like to end this last episode with a quote from Woodrow Wilson. He says, quote, The cure for bad politics is the same as the cure for tuberculosis. It is the living in the open. So
Ooh.
I think we need to expect better of our politicians, hold them to a higher accountability. We got to choose better politicians. Our options are so bad.
Our options are so bad. I love it. I'm right there with you, brother. Well, there you have it. Everyone from the Concealed Carry podcast, a reminder to train right, train often, train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care.